Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're getting into something pretty challenging. It's an exploration of these deep currents that are reshaping society in the West.
We're talking about identity, morality, public shame, all of it.
Yeah, especially in the digital age. And our goal here, as always, is to give you a kind of shortcut to understanding these really volatile dynamics.
And for this deep dive, we're focusing our analysis mainly on the arguments in Douglas Murray's book, The Madness of Crowds. He's asking a really profound question.
Which is?
What happens when the whole structure of meaning in a civilization it just collapses? And more importantly, what rushes in to fill that vacuum?
Right, so our mission is to break down his central idea that this vacuum has been filled and filled really aggressively by this highly volatile and punitive system of identity politics.
He calls it a new metaphysics, or even a new religion.
And I think it's important to be clear about that word he uses, madness. He's not just being hyperbolic, is he?
No, not at all. He's suggesting something fundamentally unstable has taken root in how we talk about morality and politics, something that drives behavior that, seems almost self-destructive and just perpetually outraged.
So he's saying that beneath all the day-to-day political noise, the tweets, the scandals, all that stuff,
there are these much greater movements at play, and they all stem from this one huge structural failure, the collapse of what he calls the grand narratives.
Okay, let's trace that, because to really get it, you have to see the sequence he lays out. It's a kind of two-stage collapse.
Exactly. First, you have the decline of the religious explanations for everything. That's been happening for centuries, but it really picked up steam from the 19th century on.
So that was the framework, the moral and existential guide for life in the West.
It answered all the big questions. Where did we come from? Why are we here? How should we act? That was the first pillar to get really shaky.
And once that was gone, what came next?
Well, nature abhors a vacuum, right? So the second pillar was the secular political ideologies that rushed in during the 20th century to replace religion.
You're talking about things like communism, fascism?
Yes, and even the big utopian promises of classical liberalism or socialism, they all offered these comprehensive, all-encompassing answers for how society should work and, where history was ultimately heading.
So we tried a kind of secular religion, but by the end of the 20th century, those ideologies had also lost their power, mostly because of the catastrophic result.
World wars.
The Cold War.
Yeah, they just lost their moral legitimacy as these grand unifying forces.
Okay, so pillar one, religion, is gone. Pillar two, secular ideology is gone. What's left?
What's left is what we generally call the postmodern era. This intellectual period, it starts about a quarter century ago, and it was defined by one main activity, deconstruction. If you imagine the world used to be seen as this solid, fixed structure, deconstruction was the project of, unweaving everything. Everything that was previously considered fixed gender, race, even objective truth itself.
The idea was to show that these categories were just arbitrary cultural constructs.
Precisely.
Let's just pause on deconstruction for a second.
Yeah.
For anyone listening who hasn't, spent time in a university humanities department lately, what did these thinkers actually do, and why does it matter so much right now?
It's absolutely vital. Deconstruction, coming from thinkers like Derrida and Foucault, was basically a challenge to essentialism.
Okay, so the idea that things have a fixed, necessary nature.
Exactly. It showed that things we see as natural or necessary, like, say, specific gender roles or racial definitions, were actually contingent. They were defined by history, by power, by language, not by some inherent nature or science.
And the goal was liberation. Right. If the system is just a performance, we could stop performing it.
That was the radical promise, yes.
So you have this massive intellectual clearing of the decks. First religion, then political ideology, and now even the very concepts we use to understand the world are deconstructed.
But here's the thing about a vacuum of meaning. Human beings and human societies can't tolerate it for long. It had to be filled.
And that filling process, for Murray, is where the madness begins.
Right. The search for meaning became frantic. It became externalized. He defines this madness as finding your purpose not through, say, inner reflection or building something positive.
Wow.
By engaging in a constant war against anybody who seems to be on the wrong side of a question, which may itself have just been reframed, and the answer to which has only just been altered.
Wow, that just sounds exhausting. It's like an ideological arms race where the goalposts are constantly moving.
It is, because the system of values being put into that void, this new metaphysics, is social justice and identity politics. And it works by actively atomizing society. It splits everyone into these specific groups based on fixed characteristics.
Sex, gender, race, sexual preference.
All of it. And critically, this isn't just about celebrating diversity. There's a moral hierarchy attached.
Right. This is the idea that possessing certain identity attributes grants you, what was the phrase, heightened moral knowledge.
Exactly. You hear it all the time now. People starting a political statement with speaking as a...
And that phrase is meant to give their argument more moral weight.
It's a modern form of moral superiority. If the old religious idea of an equal soul collapsed, the idea of an immutable, morally superior identity rushed right in to take its place.
And for everyone else, how do you learn the rules of this new system?
Well, you learn through very public, often career-destroying failure. It's like navigating a room full of invisible tripwires. You accidentally touch one.
And you're instantly and publicly condemned.
The book is this really stark early example of that kind of disproportionate punishment, the complete career destruction of the Nobel Prize winner, Professor Tim Hunt.
What happened to him?
His career was effectively destroyed after one lame joke at a conference in South Korea about men and women falling in love in the lab.
Wait, a Nobel laureate's entire career over one joke? That sounds insane.
It is, but Murray would say that speed and disproportionality are features, not bugs.
How so?
The public annihilation serves two purposes. First, it's a warning to everyone else about where the new, constantly shifting lines are. And second, it gives a sense of meaning and purpose to the people doing the condemning. The speed and severity are what create the social pressure to enforce the new metaphysics without any formal laws.
Okay, so let's dig into that mechanism. The Tim Hunt example is pretty shocking.
Yeah.
How do we get from a bad joke in a lab to a career-ending tripwire? It really goes back to that void you mentioned.
It really does. When all the old certainties became, as Murray puts it, unpopular to defend or impossible to sustain, that void didn't just stay empty. It became a breeding ground for new battles, ever fiercer campaigns, and ever more niche demands.
And the goal is huge.
It's enormous. It's nothing less than to embed a new metaphysics into our societies. A new religion, if you will.
And for a new religion, you need language that's almost impossible to argue against, which is why the terminology is so brilliant, in a way.
Take the term social justice.
Right. It's non-oppositional by design. If you try to object, you're put in this impossible rhetorical position.
It immediately creates a moral high ground that's, structurally immune to debate. Someone asks, so you're opposed to social justice?
And the implied follow-up is, what do you want, social injustice? It frames you as a bad person before the conversation has even started.
Exactly. It puts you on the defensive. It makes your questioning it itself seem like a moral failing.
And this system needs an organizational structure. That's where identity politics comes in. It provides the caucuses for social justice. It organizes people into groups.
Groups that use characteristics like race or gender as their main or only relevant attributes. It turns who you are into political leverage.
And this framework creates this huge pressure for conformity. And it happens so fast. Murray uses the issue of gay marriage as the perfect example of this, this moral whiplash.
It's a stunning case study. He points out that, really, just over a decade ago, almost nobody was supportive of gay marriage.
And that includes prominent gay rights organizations at the time, like Stonewall. They weren't campaigning for it.
Not at all. Yet in just a few years, it didn't just become legal. It became a non-negotiable, foundational value of modern liberalism.
And if you fail to update your moral software instantly,
you were placed beyond the pale. If you still held the position that was basically universal just a few years earlier, you're now considered a bigot.
So you're being judged today for an opinion you held years ago that was, at the time, completely mainstream.
It creates this impossible standard of, continuous moral foresight.
And that's what Murray identifies as a fundamental structural problem, right?
Yeah.
This new morality is, and I'm quoting here, infinitely more complex and unstable than our societies are currently willing to admit.
It's not a steady foundation, it's quicksand. And that instability is the basis for what he calls the general madness, and an unstable basis for social harmony.
Which is why it creates so much pain in public life. People are asked to perform these impossible leaps of logic and belief.
And crucially, To remain silent on things where most people might feel a very strong, very instinctive objection.
The example from the book is the demand not to object to things, such as giving children drugs to stop them going through puberty.
Right. The discomfort there isn't just a political disagreement. It's the expectation that you have to enthusiastically affirm irreversible medical procedures on children. The demand for silence or for enthusiastic support instead of open, honest inquiry. That's a hallmark of dogma replacing liberal thought.
It demands that you treat these deeply unsettled questions as completely settled. And if you don't,
You face the Tim Hunt model of punishment.
if this new metaphysics were at least logically consistent, it might be easier to navigate. But as we get into this next part, we see that the demands are often wildly contradictory. And that's a huge source of the instability.
Absolutely. Let's start with the tensions around sexuality. Specifically, the movement from a fight for liberation to what Murray sees as an intolerance that emerged in victory.
You can almost see it in the acronym itself, can't you? GLB becomes LGB, then you add the T, the Q, and so on.
Right. He notes that as the gay alphabet grew, so something changed within the movement. It began to behave in victory, as its opponents once did. The fight for tolerance seems to have been replaced by a demand for ideological purity.
And this intolerance was really on display with the controversy around a film called Voices of the Silenced.
Yes. This film featured people who had experienced same-sex attraction but had, voluntarily sought therapies to change or manage it. One of them was a Dr. Michael Davidson.
What was his story?
He spoke openly about having had homosexual experiences before he married a woman. He now runs voluntary counseling for others who want to make a similar change.
And when he went public with this,
The backlash was immediate and incredibly intense. He appeared on ITV's Good Morning Britain, and the host, Piers Morgan, just lost it. He shouted, "Shut up, you old bigot," and called him a malevolent and dangerous part of our society.
even though, as the doctor pointed out, major psychological associations don't definitively state that homosexuality is innate and unchangeable.
Right. Morgan just told him to stop talking. But the really chilling part of the story, according to Murray's analysis, was what happened to the film itself.
It wasn't just about shouting down one guy on TV.
No, the organizers had booked a private screening at a View cinema. But due to pressure from activists, the cinema canceled on them. They had to scramble to find a secret, undisclosed location at the last minute.
That is just a staggering contradiction.
It's incredible.
Activists who fought for decades for the private rights of consenting adults, the right to meet, the right to discuss things in private, were now willing to wield such power over a private event of people they disagreed with.
It completely challenges that core liberal principle of reciprocity. The idea that you have to allow the freedoms that worked for you, like free assembly and private discourse, to also work for people whose views you find repulsive.
It seems like once that power to censor became available, the temptation to use it was just too strong.
Even when it contradicts your own foundational principles.
And this struggle is tied so closely to the debate over the nature of identity itself. For so long, the political case for gay rights was built on the idea that sexuality was fixed, a hardware issue.
The born this way argument. It was politically necessary to counter the idea that it was a choice that could be, converted or suppressed.
But now you have this growing concept of sexual fluidity, which just completely destabilizes that whole narrative.
It does. The source material brings up a BBC drama by Russell T. Davies called Bob and Rose. It showed the intense anger faced by a gay man who falls in love with a woman and goes straight.
And the anger came more from his gay friends than from anyone else.
Exactly. The message was almost, you can't switch teams. Because if identity is fluid, then the entire political framework, which is based on being an oppressed, fixed minority, starts to look very shaky.
The movement risks attacking its own premise.
Yes. If you acknowledge fluidity, it sounds dangerously close to that old conservative criticism, it's just a phase, which is what they spent decades fighting against. This tension, is identity fixed or is it fluid? It's one of the most unstable parts of this whole new system.
Okay, let's turn to the other major contradiction, the one that's causing so much public friction right now. The collision between gender-critical feminism and trans activism.
This is a crack that runs right through the heart of intersectionality.
To understand it, you have to go back to that deconstruction phase we talked about at the beginning.
Right. For decades, influential academic feminists, especially those influenced by Judith Butler, argued that concepts like woman and gender were not fixed biological realities. They were cultural constructs.
A reiterated social performance.
Exactly. So if being a woman is just a performance, a role society makes you play, then your biological sex is secondary.
But then the modern trans movement arrives, and it asserts the opposite.
It asserts that gender identity is innate. It's an internal hardware reality that is often disconnected from biological sex. And this new assertion it forces the older generation of feminists into an impossible position.
Because the very same feminists who argue that womanhood was a social construct now find themselves having to defend the biological reality of woman.
Against trans activists who are using the old feminist arguments against them, but in reverse. They're saying their gender identity is the essential fixed truth.
The irony is incredible. Take someone like Germaine Greer, author of The Female Eunuch.
A revolutionary feminist. But when she argued that post-operative trans women are not women holding to a standard biological definition, she was accused of having misogynistic views.
Her, the misogynist.
She, a pillar of second-wave feminism, was branded a bigot. And excommunication from the feminist movement became a rite of passage for many of her peers, like Julie Burchill and Suzanne Moore.
The people who helped create the language of gender liberation were now being punished for not keeping up, or for sticking to a biological reality that their own academic tradition had helped to undermine.
The absurdity of policing language and biology based on political compliance really comes through in this anecdote about a billboard in Liverpool.
What happened?
A stay-at-home mom paid for a poster that had a simple dictionary definition on it. Woman defined as adult human female.
And the reaction?
An academic complained to the police. They said this definition was a symbol that makes transgender people feel unsafe. The billboard was taken down.
The police got involved over a dictionary definition.
And the woman who paid for it was branded disgraceful on television. Murray uses this to show that the new dogma has moved beyond facts or free expression. If stating a simple biological definition is now an act of aggression, a tripwire, then the space for acceptable public thought has shrunk dramatically.
And this leads us right into the real-world consequences of this kind of medical dogmatism, especially the story of James, the female-to-male detransitioner.
James's story is it's a perfect illustration of a system that is designed for affirmation, not for careful psychological diagnosis.
He went to his doctor at 18 with profound distress about his body.
And after just a few meetings at a gender identity clinic, he was started on hormone replacement therapy.
He described the whole process as ridiculously easy and a bit too nice.
He felt he was never really questioned, never challenged. He said he was never encouraged to look into it too deeply. The path to hormones and surgery was just streamlined. It points to a clear ideological bias towards medical intervention.
And this is being reinforced by some pretty high-profile doctors. The book quotes a Dr. Olson Kennedy.
Yes, who publicly criticized the idea of doing extensive mental health assessments on kids who want to change sex. She compared starting puberty blockers to starting insulin for diabetes.
As if gender distress is just a simple biological fact that needs a medical fix, with no psychological complexity at all.
And then there was the Pop-Tart analogy she used to explain this to an 8-year-old child.
Right, that was particularly disturbing.
It's a striking example of ideological coaching. She describes a child who says, "I'm a girl because I have this body." So she presents them with this analogy of a cinnamon Pop-Tart being in a strawberry box.
To guide the child to the conclusion.
I think I'm a boy and the girl's covering me up. The goal isn't exploration, it's just giving this kid the language to talk about his gender, regardless of the long-term consequences.
And the atmosphere at the conference where she presented this was described as being like a Christian revival meeting.
Yeah, the audience was laughing and cooing. It really confirms Murray's critique, that dogma has replaced scientific caution. The pressure to affirm, and never to question, is a clear sign of the new metaphysics at work inside a medical setting.
Let's look at one final powerful contradiction here. The incredibly confusing signals being sent by prominent women about sexuality, swinging between what he calls libertinism and prudery.
This ambiguity just makes modern interaction terrifyingly difficult. Murray contrasts two moments, 2 decades apart. In 1995, you have Drew Barrymore on David Letterman's show.
Right. She climbs on his desk and flashes him, unprompted.
And the audience loved the whole thing. It was seen as this act of wild sexual liberation.
Then you fast forward to 2016. Mayim Bialik, who calls herself a modest feminist, flashes Piers Morgan on James Corden's show. And this is celebrated as an especially feminist act.
So on one hand, exposing yourself, unasked, is celebrated as liberation.
But then just a year later, in 2017, you have the #MeToo movement explode. And suddenly the standard becomes zero tolerance for any and all sexual advances, no matter the context.
The rules just shifted too fast. The expectations became impossible to follow. How can women be celebrated for being aggressively sexual while at the same time demanding that men adhere to this instantaneous universal code of absolute formality?
The Nicki Minaj Anaconda video analysis in the book just sums up this impossible demand perfectly.
It really does. Murray breaks down the core conflict. The demand is that a woman must be allowed to be sexy and sexual without being sexualized.
So in the video, she does this incredibly provocative lap dance right in a man's face, clearly trying to get a physical response.
And the key moment is when the man, who is obviously frustrated and provoked, hesitates and then puts one hand gently over her buttocks.
And the game changes instantly.
Instantly. She hits his hand away and walks off. She goes from hypersexualized performer to, as Murray puts it, mother superior in a heartbeat.
So the challenge for the man in that scenario, and by extension for all of society, is just unresolvable.
It is. She can explicitly provoke him, but if he responds to that provocation even gently, she instantly becomes the victim, and he is morally shamed for his inexcusable behavior. This ambiguity, when it's magnified by the speed of these moral shifts, makes the unwritten rules of interaction just perpetually dangerous. And the same kind of instability and moral asymmetry we've just been talking about, it's just as pronounced when it comes to race and anti-racism.
Murray's argument here is that a lot of people who genuinely believe they are continuing Martin Luther King Jr.'s work are actually actively moving away from his dream.
Right. MLK's dream from his 1963 speech was for colorblindness, for a world where people will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
The book calls this the most beautiful and only long-term solution for racial harmony.
But instead of moving towards that ideal, contemporary anti-racism discourse has decided to turn race into the most important issue of all.
And you see this in the rise of academic fields that demand constant, almost obsessive focus on racial identity.
The example given is the University of Wisconsin course, The Problem of Whiteness.
Right. A discipline that defines an entire group of people solely by their racial characteristics, their attitudes, their moral failings, their cultural baggage.
And Murray argues this is itself a form of racism. It insists that you must define and problematize the characteristics of white people, not just in the abstract, but in the day-to-day business of judging other people. The goal is to enforce a color-obsessed view of the world, not a color-blind one.
And that obsession leads directly to this core problem of moral asymmetry, where blame is assigned based on the identity of the person speaking, not on what they actually say.
The identity of the speaker either condemns them from the start or gives them a free pass.
The book gives two really clear case studies to show this new logic in action: Benedict Cumberbatch and Sarah Jeong.
Okay, so Benedict Cumberbatch, a white, straight male actor, is on a TV show. He's trying to make a point about the lack of diversity in Hollywood, and in doing so, he uses the outmoded term colored.
So, a minor linguistic slip-up while trying to be an ally.
Exactly, and he was immediately censured, ridiculed. The severity of his words was very low, but his identity, white, straight, male, put him in a position of, as Murray terms it, greatest unsafety. He was instantly condemned.
Now, you contrast that with Sarah Jeong.
Yes. She was hired by the New York Times despite having a long history of posting crude, repeated anti-white tweets.
Things like, are white people genetically predisposed to burn faster in the sun, thus logically being only fit to live underground like groveling goblins?
And just the simple sweeping statement, white men are bullshit.
These are incredibly derogatory, arguably racist statements. How on earth did the New York Times defend hiring her?
The paper stood by her. They claimed that as a young Asian woman, she had been the target of online harassment and was simply imitating the rhetoric of her harassers.
So her identity and her claim to victimhood were used to excuse the content of her words.
To get her off, as Murray puts it. It made what she said secondary, and you saw this echoed by others. The writer Ezra Klein said he felt inclined towards generosity when he interpreted her tweets because she fit the correct political tribe and identity.
So the logic is clear. The white male's minor linguistic error is unforgivable.
While the minority speaker's identity provides a shield, even for extreme derogatory language, because it's seen as just criticizing the dominant power structure.
This means what you say is totally secondary. The only thing that matters is your race and gender, which determines whether you should be condemned or listened to.
Which is the definition of moving away from judging by character and back to judging by color.
And this obsession with identity then breeds this intense cultural policing. The examples from the Portland foodie war zone are just wild.
They're almost unbelievable. A bistro called Saffron Colonial was mobbed online for glorifying colonialism, and the owner was forced to change the name.
But the burrito food truck story is even more bizarre.
Right. A couple who ran a food truck selling burritos received death threats. They had to close their business. Why? Because their DNA was wrong.
They were white, not Mexican.
So their crime was stealing Mexican culture, even though they said they learned their techniques in Mexico.
And this cultural rigidity is now bleeding into the arts, pushing back against decades of progress towards colorblind casting.
Absolutely. Look at the controversy over casting a white actor, Joel Kinnaman, in the Netflix show Altered Carbon. He was playing a character whose consciousness had been put into a new body, a white body, that was originally Asian.
So the plot itself is literally about consciousness being separate from the body.
And still, critics called it problematic.
And then there was the successful social media campaign to bully Sierra Boggess, a Caucasian actress, out of playing Maria, who is Puerto Rican, in a performance of West Side Story.
All in the name of racial exclusivity.
It's a complete reversal of the liberal ideal that let black actors play Henry V or black sopranos sing roles that weren't written for them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, ability is second to identity. Murray warns that if the logic that got Sierra Boggess fired is applied everywhere, we're heading towards mandatory racial segregation in casting, a concept that's totally antithetical to artistic freedom.
Okay, so this madness of crowds, this whole system driven by contradictions and identity obsession, it couldn't exist at this scale without the platforms we all use every single day.
Oh, Silicon Valley's role is enormous. You could argue it's definitive.
Murray points out that companies like Google, Twitter, and Facebook have a business model that, at its core, relies on finding customers ready to pay to modify someone else's behavior.
The platforms are literally designed to amplify outrage. They create a marketplace for attention, and outrage gets a lot of attention.
And he says social media is a superlative way to embed new dogmas and crush contrary opinion.
Because it's eradicated the space that used to exist between public and private language.
Right. Anything you say, anywhere, can be screen grabbed, posted, and used against you forever. It's a system built for retribution and vengeance.
But the crucial point is that these ideologies, intersectionality, social justice, they're not just, cultural preferences at these companies anymore. They are being embedded directly into the code, into the algorithms.
This is the field of machine learning fairness, or MLF.
Exactly. And the stated goal is noble to correct for historical bias. But in practice, the application often ends up sacrificing truth to achieve a specific political goal.
Let's walk through the examples from Google image searches in the book, because they are just stunning. They show this explicit political bias completely overriding factual reality.
Okay, take the search for European art. You expect to see the Mona Lisa, Rembrandt, Van Gogh.
The classics.
Right. But that's not what Google gives you. The very first image is a portrait by Velázquez of his assistant, Juan de Pareja, who is black, and the rows that follow are heavily dominated by portraits of black figures in art.
So the impression it gives the casual user is that the entire history of European art consists largely of portraits of black people.
It's not a reflection of history. It's a radical skewing of history to be representative of what some people today might like to see. The algorithm isn't a neutral mirror anymore. It's an editor with an agenda.
And that bias gets even more aggressive with certain search terms.
It does. If you search for straight couple, you'll get results that include lesbian couples or gay men. If you search straight couples, plural, by the third line of images, the results are only gay couples, with these little tags added like, straight couples can learn from gay couples.
But the most targeted example, the one that really feels like an act of editorial hostility, is the search for straight white couple.
Yes. The second photo that comes up is a close-up of someone's knuckle with the word hate written on it.
Wow.
This is where you can really see the human agency in the coding. Murray argues it suggests a deliberate effort by the programmers to upset throw, disorientate, or enrage people who are searching for these terms.
The implication being that if you search for Asian couple, you don't need re-education, but if you search for white couples, you do.
It completely compromises the neutrality of the search engine, which is a cornerstone of liberal access to information.
And this ideological enforcement is perfectly mirrored in how the platforms moderate content. Twitter is the prime example. It's become the enforcer of this new metaphysics.
Their hateful conduct policy has basically become a tool for ideological suppression. The book details how the feminist campaigner Meghan Murphy was banned.
For what?
For tweeting simple, factual statements like, "Men aren't women." Twitter deemed that hateful conduct.
And yet at the same time, accounts that were attacking so-called TERFs, trans-exclusionary radical feminists, were allowed to flourish.
Right. An editor at Esquire magazine got thousands of retweets for tweeting "fuck TERFs" with no consequences.
So it's a clear asymmetry. The platform has decided what's true and what counts as permissible hate speech, based entirely on who is criticizing whom in this new identity hierarchy.
And they went further. They changed their policy to permanently ban people for dead-naming or misgendering trans people. They are actively legislating truth on their platform, reinforcing the dogma that gender identity is an immutable fact.
And this ideological capture isn't just in Silicon Valley. It's happening across the board in corporations and governments, especially with the rollout of unconscious bias training.
It's everywhere. It's now required for millions of employees. 2.8 million U.S. federal employees, the British government, huge corporations. It's being rolled out globally at enormous expense.
But the incredible irony here, as Murray points out, is that this entire corporate program is built on incredibly shaky science.
It relies heavily on something called the Harvard Implicit Association Test, the IAT. Yet 2 of the 3 creators of that very test have publicly admitted it can't do what people claim it can do with enough accuracy.
What do they say?
One of the creators stated explicitly, "Our mind isn't that stable. There's an incorrect interpretation of the work." So you have a theory that is, at best, insufficiently studied, whose own creators have serious doubts.
And it's been turned into this massive, expensive, globally enforced business plan.
The fact that it's been adopted so widely, regardless of the scientific evidence, just shows the level of cultural conformity that's now required. It's less about psychology and more about institutional virtue signaling.
And it is permeated everywhere. The book notes that even the chief people officer of the Daily Telegraph, a conservative newspaper, was enthusiastically pushing an intersectional approach in business.
Which just demonstrates how thoroughly this ideology has been embedded in institutions across the entire political spectrum. Compliance is expected at every single level.
The entire system we've been describing seems to run on a new kind of fuel. A new incentive structure where victimhood has gone from being, just a misfortune in life
to a prized cultural status.
Murray draws this really sharp contrast with the attitude of past generations. He brings up FDR's generation, people who lived through depressions and world wars.
For them, misfortune was something to be met with a stiff upper lip. When everyone was a victim at some point, no one won sympathy by wearing victimhood as a badge.
But today, that script has been completely flipped. Victimhood is eagerly publicized, even sought after. The whole social reward system has been rewired.
Absolutely. The person who can profess themselves to be most aggrieved gets the most attention. Outrage is rewarded. It gets you social capital, sympathy, influence.
So the environment incentivizes you to be constantly on the lookout for evidence of your own oppression or your tribe's oppression, no matter how tiny the slight.
And Murray suggests that this sheer abundance of claims might actually signal a great shortage of real oppression.
How so?
His argument is that truly oppressed people don't have the time or the energy to worry about a novelist's speech, or whether a burrito is being cooked by someone of the wrong ethnicity. The level of micromanagement suggests a culture of comfort that's looking for a fight.
And this cultural momentum is supercharged by the permanence of the digital world, this idea of an online doppelganger.
Right. Your mistakes, a bad joke, an old tweet, using an outmoded term, they're all forever accessible. They're always available for retribution and vengeance. There's no statute of limitations.
And the cruelest version of this is what Murray calls cross-generational shaming. The case of the race car driver, Connor Daly, is just devastating.
It's incredible. In 2018, Connor Daly lost his sponsorship, not for anything he did,
but because of a derogatory term his father had used in a radio interview back in the 1980s.
Before Connor was even born, the father had apologized, expressed deep regret. It didn't matter. The punishment was brought down on the son's career decades later.
That's the ultimate reach of this punitive ideology. The sins of the father are literally visited upon the son. It makes real forgiveness almost impossible.
So when you're faced with this constant fear of being tripped up, of being shamed for something you didn't even do, how do you navigate public life? Mary says there are only two weak, temporary answers.
The first one is what he calls tribal forgiveness.
Basically, we forgive the people in our tribe, and we aggressively prosecute our enemies. We saw that with Ezra Klein's inclination towards generosity for Sarah Zhuang's racist tweets. She was on the right team, so her racism was decoded as justified frustration.
But if you're on the wrong team, even a tiny mistake can ruin you. What's the second answer?
The second answer is reserved for the rich and famous, public penance. And it often takes on this bizarre theatrical quality.
The Lewis Hamilton example is a classic.
Yes, the Formula One champion. He posted a video where he was teasing his nephew for wearing a princess dress, saying, "Boys don't wear princess dresses."
And the backlash was immediate.
An anti-bullying charity condemned him. He was called transphobic. An anti-rape charity even demanded he be stripped of his royal honor.
And just apologizing wasn't enough.
Not even close. Several months later, he appeared on the cover of GQ magazine wearing this lurid, kilt-like skirt. And the headline read, "I want to make amends. Lewis Hamilton refuses to skirt the issue."
So the message is clear. If you're famous, you have to perform these symbolic acts of submission. You have to publicly advertise your penance to get back in the good graces of the ever-changing dogmas of the age.
It's a high-profile public abasement, and it serves as a powerful warning to everyone else about the price of disobedience.
So Murray's conclusion is that this whole system, fueled by constant accusation, by grudges, by these shifting rules and demands for impossible conformity, it risks undermining and even bringing down the whole liberal era.
Because a liberal society requires humility, it requires open inquiry, it requires accepting that many big questions are legitimately unsettled.
But this new system does the opposite.
It insists that questions are settled when they are not, that things are known which are unknown, like the very definition of sex or the future of a child's gender identity, and the result is that people are left to doubt absolutely everything. This dogmatic, vengeful ideology is just fundamentally hostile to the tolerance and pluralism you need for a healthy, diverse society.
And that brings us right back to the core challenge, doesn't it? In a world that actively encourages us to divide ourselves by identity, to doubt every institution, and to find virtue in outrage, we have to decide. Do we cling to the anger that the system rewards?
Or do we seek that much harder path of communication, of nuance, of the humility that our liberal institutions were actually built on?
If you look back, as you said, to the origins of the anti-racism movement, Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision of true colorblindness, that still feels like the most beautiful and maybe the only long-term solution.
Because constantly escalating the focus on race, this obsession with whiteness studies and punitive norms, it just guarantees that race will continue to poison every interaction for the foreseeable future. A return to that aspiration of colorblindness is, in Murray's view, a necessary first step to get out of the madness of crowds.
Thanks for joining us. If you'd like to watch the mini explainer for this topic, click the link in the description and explore the full Critical Thinking Deep Dives playlist for more long-form episodes.